Imagine walking through Windsor Castle and suddenly seeing Princess Diana's portrait hanging in a place where, according to the story, it had been absent for more than 2 decades. No press conference, no grand palace announcement, just one carefully planned decision that supposedly brought Diana's image out of storage and back into the heart of royal life. The narrative claims Prince William had quietly prepared the move for years, making sure every institutional detail was handled before anyone could object. But he allegedly wasn't acting completely alone. Princess Anne, the aunt famous for her direct approach and unwavering sense of duty, reportedly stood beside him during the portrait's return. And according to this dramatic account, what Anne eventually said about Diana created an even bigger reaction than the painting itself. Before we uncover what supposedly happened inside Windsor, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications for more royal family stories, history, and fascinating moments. Because underneath this story lies something much bigger than a portrait. It is about memory, family wounds, and the question of how Princess Diana should be represented by the institution she once belonged to. But separating documented history from dramatic storytelling is essential because many of the private scenes described in this narrative have not been publicly established. At the center of the competitor's story is a portrait of Princess Diana that the narrator claims had remained in storage for roughly 25 years. According to the narrative, the painting had originally been intended for a prestigious ceremonial position at Windsor. But after Diana's death in 1997, that placement supposedly never happened. Instead, the portrait was allegedly wrapped, stored away, and largely forgotten inside the royal residence. The storyteller uses this image, Diana's face physically hidden from view, as a metaphor for how her memory was supposedly handled inside royal circles after her death. Outside palace walls, of course, Diana remained one of the most recognizable women in the world. Her photographs continued appearing in documentaries, books, newspapers, exhibitions, and public memorials, while her humanitarian legacy remained an important part of her public reputation. The competitor's script deliberately contrasts that enormous public memory with its claim of an unseen portrait inside Windsor. It then goes much further, suggesting that Camilla played a role in reducing Diana's visual presence within royal residences. Those specific allegations are not established by evidence supplied in the script, so they should remain attributed claims. Nevertheless, within the narrative, the supposedly forgotten portrait becomes a powerful symbol of unfinished family history waiting to return. The emotional foundation of the story then shifts toward Prince William and the extraordinary experience of losing his mother while still a teenager. William was 15 when Diana died in Paris in August 1997, and days later, millions around the world watched him walk behind her coffin during the funeral procession. That documented history gives the competitor narrative a powerful foundation, but the script then adds much more speculative material about William's private thoughts, anger, and long-term intentions. According to the storyteller's interpretation, William supposedly spent years noticing how Diana's memory was represented within royal spaces, while choosing not to confront the issue publicly. Rather than presenting him as impulsive, the narrative portrays him as extraordinarily patient, someone who allegedly waited until he possessed enough institutional influence to make a permanent change. The portrait, therefore, becomes more than decoration. Within the story, returning it represents a son's attempt to restore his mother's place in family history. This framing is particularly effective because it contrasts William's public restraint with the narrator's interpretation of his private emotions. Yet we should distinguish between what is known and what is storytelling. William's grief and his public efforts to honor Diana are well documented. A secret decades-long strategy surrounding this specific portrait, however, is not established by the material provided. Still, that contrast drives the competitor script's suspense. Princess Anne becomes the second major figure, because the narrative presents her as the person capable of turning William's alleged plan into something emotionally unforgettable. Anne has long been publicly associated with duty, an extensive schedule of royal engagements, and a straightforward personality. The competitor script builds upon that reputation and imagines her as someone unwilling to allow Diana's place in royal history to remain unresolved forever. According to the account, William eventually contacted his aunt before the supposed portrait restoration, and Anne enthusiastically supported the idea. The story then describes an almost cinematic scene inside Windsor, trusted staff entering a closed gallery, protective wrapping slowly being removed, the portrait becoming visible again, and Anne personally observing its placement. None of those private details should be treated as verified merely because they appear in the competitor's narration. But structurally, this is where the script's emotional tension begins paying off. William represents Diana's son, carrying a direct personal connection to his mother. Anne represents continuity within the institution itself, a senior royal who knew Diana and experienced the monarchy before, during, and after Diana's years within it. By placing these two figures together, the storyteller transforms the portrait's alleged return from a son's private tribute into something larger, a symbolic acknowledgement from one royal generation to another that Diana's historical importance cannot simply disappear. According to the narrative, the most dramatic moment came when the portrait was finally placed in its intended position. The competitor describes Diana's image being installed beside Queen Elizabeth II, creating a symbolic scene involving two women who influenced the monarchy in very different ways. Once everything was supposedly completed, the room fell silent. There was no celebration, no prepared speech, and no immediate announcement to the public. Instead, the story claims Princess Anne simply stood looking at Diana's portrait before quietly saying words expressing that Diana belonged there and always had. Whether Anne actually made such a private statement cannot be established from the supplied material, but within the narrative, those words become more important than the physical portrait itself. They transform the moment from an administrative decision about artwork into an emotional acknowledgement of Diana's place within royal history. Anne is portrayed as someone who rarely expresses such feelings publicly, making the alleged comment especially powerful in the storyteller's version of events. Meanwhile, William's supposed strategy is presented as intentionally quiet. Rather than using his mother's portrait to create a public confrontation, the narrative says he wanted the placement completed before anyone could challenge it. By the end of that evening, Diana's image was supposedly back in the royal space the story claims had once been intended for her. The following morning brings the confrontation that the entire competitor script has been building toward. According to the account, Camilla returned to Windsor and discovered that Diana's portrait had supposedly been installed without her knowledge. The narrator describes her as furious, demanding that the painting be removed and seeking intervention from King Charles. These dramatic private reactions are not independently established by the supplied source, so they should remain clearly presented as claims within the story. What makes this section important narratively is Charles's alleged response, or rather his lack of one. The competitor claims that Charles refused to reverse William's decision and allowed the portrait to remain. Within the storytelling, his silence becomes symbolic. For years, Charles is portrayed as attempting to balance his relationship with Camilla against the complicated legacy of Diana and the feelings of his sons. In this imagined confrontation, however, the narrator interprets his refusal to intervene as an acknowledgement that Diana's historical position could no longer be treated as something inconvenient. The story then brings Anne directly into the aftermath. According to the account, she confronted Camilla privately and delivered a short statement about Diana deserving the recognition she had finally received. Again, no evidence in the supplied script independently verifies this conversation. But those alleged words provide the emotional climax the competitor has carefully constructed. Ultimately, the story is powerful because it turns one portrait into a symbol of something much larger: memory, grief, family loyalty, and the complicated question of who gets to shape royal history. The competitor narrative portrays William as a son who supposedly waited decades before finding a quiet way to restore his mother's presence within Windsor, while Anne becomes the senior royal willing to stand beside him when that moment finally arrives. Camilla, meanwhile, is positioned as the person most unsettled by Diana's renewed visibility, although many of the specific actions and private reactions attributed to her in this script are not supported by independently verified evidence within the supplied material. What remains unquestionably true at the heart of the story is Diana's enduring cultural significance and the deep connection William has publicly maintained with his mother's memory and charitable legacy. That is why stories involving Diana continue attracting extraordinary attention decades after her death. Her influence did not simply disappear in 1997. It continues through her sons, grandchildren, charitable causes, and public memory. Now we want to hear from you. Do you believe Princess Diana should continue receiving a prominent place in royal family history? Share your opinion in the comments below. And if you enjoy royal family stories, history, and fascinating discussions like this one, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications for the next story.